When you watch a lawyer step into a courtroom, the first thing you notice isn't emotion, it's structure. They don't storm in with their feelings spilling everywhere, pointing fingers, yelling, or losing control. They start with a calm, deliberate order. They set the stage, they lay out the facts, and they prepare the jury, the judge, and even their opponent to see exactly where they're going. That's how they win. They don't win because they felt the strongest. They win because they built the strongest case. Now think about how most of us argue. What do? We skip the case. We jump straight into the emotions. We walk in like, "You never listen," or "I'm tired of this." And in that moment, we've already lost half the battle. Why? Because we started with chaos instead of clarity. We came in swinging instead of building. And when you come in swinging, the other person doesn't feel invited to listen. They feel cornered. They feel attacked. And when someone feels attacked, what do? They defend. They push back. They stop hearing you. But when you argue like a lawyer, you understand that structure is your weapon. You know that before you pour out the passion, you've got to set the frame. You've got to lay the foundation brick by brick. You've got to give your words a skeleton to stand on. Imagine walking into a room with someone you care about, someone you disagree with, and instead of firing off, you say, "Here's what happened. Here's how I see it. Here's why it matters to me. And here's what I'm asking for." You just built a case. You didn't scream. You didn't accuse. You didn't attack. You built. And what you build has weight. It has presence. It carries authority. That's what structure does. It slows you down. But in slowing you down, it makes you powerful. Because anyone can get loud. Anyone can throw accusations. But not everyone can stand steady, put their emotions on hold for a moment, and build an argument that's so clear the other person has no choice but to stop and think. That's rare. That's influence. And the beauty of structure is that it keeps you from losing yourself in the heat of the moment. Think about it. How many arguments have ended with you saying something you didn't mean? Something that slipped out because you were angry, not because it was true. That's what happens when emotions run the show. But structure is discipline. It keeps you on track. It reminds you, this is what I want to say, this is how I want to say it, and this is the outcome I'm moving toward. It's like giving yourself a compass in the middle of a storm. Now, let's be honest, this is not easy. Because we're wired to react. We're wired to defend ourselves. But arguing like a lawyer is about choosing response over reaction. It's about stepping back and asking, if I were presenting this to a jury, how would I say it so they understand me? How would I explain it so they can't ignore the truth in it? And when you think like that, suddenly your words stop being scattered and they start becoming sharp. They stop being messy and they start being magnetic. And here's the key. You don't have to be perfect in the delivery. You don't have to sound like you're reading a script. Structure doesn't mean stiff. It doesn't mean robotic. It means intentional. It means you respect your own words enough to put them in order before you throw them out. It means you respect the other person enough to give them something worth listening to instead of just unloading raw emotion. Because at the end of the day, no one remembers how loud you were. They remember how clear you were. No one remembers how angry you sounded. They remember whether or not your words made sense. Did you make them pause? Did you make them think? Did you build a case they couldn't ignore? That's what lasts. So the next time you feel that fire rising in your chest, the next time you're ready to snap, stop. Slow it down. Build your structure. Picture yourself in that courtroom. not as the angry partner, not as the defensive friend, not as the reactive coworker, but as the lawyer, calm, collected, clear, ready to win, not by volume, but by vision. Because the truth is simple. Emotion may start an argument, but structure is what ends it. One of the most powerful tools a lawyer has isn't the argument they make. It's the questions they ask. Think about that for a moment. A lawyer doesn't just stand there delivering a monologue, pounding the table, hoping the jury buys into raw emotion. No, they know that the right question can do something even stronger. It can expose the truth without ever raising their voice. It can turn the spotlight not on themselves, but on the other person. And when that light shines, the truth often speaks louder than any speech. Now let's compare that to how we usually argue. Most of us, when we're upset, go straight into telling. We tell the other person what they did wrong. We tell them how they failed. We tell them how they always do this or never do that. And what happens? Walls go up, defenses lock in. You start hearing, that's not true, or you're exaggerating, or worse, complete silence. You've said everything, but nothing has landed. Why? Because telling rarely changes people. It pushes them. Questions, though. Questions pull. Picture this. Instead of saying, you don't care about me, you ask, can you help me understand what you were feeling in that moment? Instead of declaring, you never listen, you try. When I shared this with you, how did it come across on your end? Do you see the difference? One statement puts the other person in a corner, back against the wall. The other invites them into a space. It says, I'm not here to slam the door. I'm here to open it and let you step through. And people respond so differently when they feel invited instead of accused. Lawyers know this because questions have power. A well-placed question doesn't just get information. It creates reflection. It makes the other person stop, think, and sometimes realize something they hadn't even considered themselves. You don't have to convince them. They convince themselves. And that is far stronger than anything you could have shouted in frustration. Think about a time when you felt misunderstood. Maybe you were ready for someone to argue back, but instead they asked you, what do you need right now? How did that feel? That's the effect of a good question. It disarms the fire. It lowers the tension. It creates an atmosphere where honesty feels safe. And when honesty feels safe, solutions start to appear. But asking questions isn't about being manipulative. It's not about setting traps. It's about curiosity. It's about saying, I care more about understanding than winning. That's what a lawyer knows. They don't ask questions to show off. They ask questions to get to the truth. And in your relationships, in your conflicts, when you adopt that same mindset, you shift from combat to connection. You shift from trying to dominate the argument to actually moving it forward. And yes, sometimes questions are hard to ask, especially when you feel hurt. Because let's be real, when emotions are high, curiosity feels unnatural. You don't want to ask, you want to accuse. But here's the discipline when you train yourself to pause and lead with a question. You instantly change the energy in the room. Instead of pouring gasoline on the fire, you pour water. Instead of escalating, you open a door. And 9 times out of 10, that door will lead to a better conversation than you ever thought possible. Here's the truth. People don't resist questions the way they resist accusations. If you accuse, they defend. If you ask, they explain. And explanation is where healing begins. Explanation is where perspective comes out. You may not agree with their side, but now you've got it on the table, and once it's on the table, you can work with it. That's how progress happens. So The next time you're in that heated moment when your instinct is to say, you always or you never, stop yourself. Ask instead. Be curious, not combative. Think like a lawyer. Draw out the truth with questions and let the answers shape the conversation. Because questions aren't a sign of weakness. They're a strategy of wisdom. They don't mean you're backing down. They mean you're playing smarter. And here's what's remarkable when you lead with questions. You don't just change the argument. You change the relationship. You create trust. You show the other person that their voice matters too. And when people feel heard, they're far more likely to hear you back. So don't underestimate the power of a question. Don't rush to statements when curiosity could do the work for you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say in an argument isn't a statement at all. It's a question that makes the truth undeniable. One of the greatest mistakes we make when we argue is confusing the person with the point. We take an action, a mistake, a single moment, and we attach it to someone's identity. Instead of saying, this thing hurt me, we end up saying, you are hurtful. Instead of saying, this action broke my trust, we throw out, you're untrustworthy. And right there, the conversation shifts from problem solving to character assassination. It stops being about what happened and becomes about who they are. And once it's about who they are, the argument rarely ends well. Lawyers understand this distinction better than anyone. They can walk into a courtroom, face an opponent, and fight tooth and nail against their case. But when it's all over, they can still shake hands and walk away with respect. Because they know the fight was never against the person. The fight was against the point being argued. And that's what makes them so effective. They separate identity from issue. They attack the idea, not the human. Now, think about how different our relationships would feel if we practiced that same discipline. Imagine an argument where you didn't say, you always embarrass me, but instead said, when that happened, I felt embarrassed. Do you hear the difference? One paints the person as permanently flawed. The other points to a specific moment, a specific action, without erasing the dignity of the other person. One builds walls. The other opens a door, and let's be honest, when someone feels like you're attacking who they are, their natural instinct is to fight back. But when they feel like you're addressing a situation, not their soul, they're far more likely to listen. Why? Because you've left their identity intact. You've said, I see you. I still respect you. But I need to address this thing between us. And that tone changes everything. It's the difference between saying, you're selfish, and saying, when you made that choice, I felt left out. One labels the person, the other describes the behavior. One creates shame, the other creates awareness. And if your goal is resolution, not revenge, awareness is the path you want to walk. Because shame only drives people deeper into defense. Awareness, though, invites growth. This is not easy. It takes control. It takes swallowing your pride in the heat of the moment. Because when you're hurt, the temptation is to strike back with labels, to wound the other person the way you feel wounded. But when you choose discipline over impulse, when you decide, I'm going to separate the person from the point, you not only protect the argument, you protect the relationship. Think of it like surgery. If there's something harmful in the body, the surgeon doesn't attack the whole person. They don't slash wildly. They go in carefully, precisely, and they target the problem. Because their goal is healing, not destruction. That's what your words should be in an argument. Precise, targeted, addressing the problem without damaging the person in the process. And here's the powerful part. When you learn to argue this way, you give the other person space to change without losing face. You give them the chance to take responsibility for their actions without feeling like their entire character is under fire. That's a gift. That's leadership. That's love in practice. Because love doesn't tear people down to make a point. Love builds even while it corrects. So when you step into your next argument, remind yourself this person is not the problem. The problem is the problem. My words aren't weapons against their worth. They're tools to uncover the truth, to move us forward, to build something stronger on the other side of this conflict. Because at the end of the day, you don't win an argument by destroying the other person. You win by solving the issue. You win by protecting the relationship while addressing the reality. You win when the other person walks away not feeling smaller, but feeling heard, respected, and challenged to grow. That's the real victory. That's the kind of argument worth having. So never forget, attack the point, not the person. Because if you lose their respect while making your case, you may win the fight, but you'll lose what truly mattered. A courtroom case doesn't survive without evidence. You can have the most passionate lawyer, the most moving speech, the most fiery tone. But if there's no proof, the case collapses. And that's exactly what happens in our personal arguments when we rely on assumptions instead of evidence. We say things like, "You always do this," or "You never care," or "I know what you were thinking." Those sound powerful in the moment, but they're built on shaky ground, because always and never are rarely true, and assumptions are rarely accurate. When you argue with those, the other person doesn't hear your heart. They hear your exaggeration, and exaggeration gives them permission to ignore your point altogether. But think about how a lawyer works. They don't tell the jury, "This defendant always lies." They don't say, "This witness never tells the truth." They don't guess about intentions or make sweeping claims. Instead, they bring out the text messages, the receipts, the timeline, the testimony. They say, "On this day, at this time, this happened." And suddenly, the case has weight. The jury can't dismiss it. Why? Because the evidence is undeniable. It's not built on feeling, it's built on fact. Now imagine bringing that same principle into your everyday arguments. Instead of saying, "You never help me around the house," what if you said, "Last night, when the dishes piled up, I felt overwhelmed because I was already tired." See the difference. The first statement attacks character, the second describes an action. The first creates defensiveness, the second creates awareness. That's what evidence does. It grounds the conversation in reality, not assumption. Here's the hard truth: when we argue without evidence, we make the argument about perception. And perception can always be debated. But when we argue with evidence, we make the argument about reality. And reality is harder to dismiss. That doesn't mean you need to keep a logbook of every mistake someone makes. It doesn't mean you need to throw receipts like a prosecutor trying to embarrass the other person. It means you stay specific. It means you anchor your words in actual experiences instead of vague accusations. And this does something powerful, not just for them, but for you. When you focus on evidence, you force yourself to slow down. You force yourself to move past raw emotion and into clarity. You stop painting the whole picture black and instead point to the one brushstroke that needs to change. That keeps the conflict manageable. It keeps the other person from feeling hopeless. Because if you tell someone, "You always fail me," where do they even begin? But if you tell them, "When you missed that call, it hurt," now there's something they can respond to something they can work on, something they can make right. Evidence keeps you honest too. Because let's admit it, sometimes in the heat of an argument, we exaggerate to win. We stretch the truth just enough to make the other person look worse. And for a moment, it feels powerful. But later, it leaves scars. Because when the exaggeration gets exposed, when the assumption proves wrong, your credibility takes the hit. And once credibility is gone, trust starts slipping right behind it. So if you want to argue like a lawyer, commit to this. No assumptions, no sweeping claims, no fighting ghosts that aren't there. Stick to what happened. Speak to what you actually know. Bring evidence, not accusations, because evidence invites conversation, but accusations shut it down. And here's the beauty. When you argue with evidence, you give the other person a chance to step into the truth without feeling like you've condemned their whole character. You give them a clear picture of what hurt, what mattered, and what needs to change. And that's how arguments stop being endless circles of blame and start becoming turning points toward growth. So the next time you feel tempted to throw out, you never or you always, stop yourself, get specific, point to the moment, bring evidence. Because in the end, assumptions build walls, but evidence builds bridges. And if your goal is not just to win the fight, but to move forward stronger together, bridges will always take you farther. Step into a courtroom for just a moment in your imagination. You see the judge, the jury, the opposing side, and a lawyer standing to speak. Now picture that lawyer losing control, shouting, slamming papers, letting their emotions take over. What happens? The room shifts. The jury doesn't trust them anymore. The judge loses patience. The strength of their case weakens, not because the facts weren't solid, but because the delivery lost credibility. That's the danger of losing your calm. You might have the truth, but no one hears it. And isn't that what happens in our own lives when we argue? We think volume is power. We think if we can get louder, faster, more dramatic, somehow we'll win. But the truth is, the loudest voice rarely convinces anyone. It might dominate. It might intimidate, but it doesn't persuade. The voice that persuades is the one that stays steady, the one that carries calm in the middle of conflict. Because calm doesn't mean weak. Calm means in control. Calm means untouchable. When you keep your composure, you send a message without even saying a word. I am not owned by this moment. I am not controlled by this heat. I am bigger than this argument. That presence is powerful. That presence makes people lean in. And sometimes silence, just holding back, breathing, letting the other person storm pass, can do more to win the room than 100 clever lines. But here's the challenge. Staying calm doesn't come naturally when you're hurt, when you feel misunderstood, when anger is pressing against your chest like a rising wave. In those moments, every part of you wants to react, to push back, to shout. And that's why calm isn't an accident. It's a choice. It's a skill. It's discipline you train like a muscle. Think of a lawyer again. They prepare for cross-examination knowing it could get heated. They expect the push, the provocation, the attempt to rattle them. And they decide ahead of time, no matter what happens, I'm going to stay grounded. That's not easy, but it's why they're effective. Because the one who keeps control of themselves often ends up controlling the room. Now think about your own arguments. The next time someone raises their voice at you, what if instead of matching it, you lower yours? What if instead of rushing to defend, you pause, you breathe, you stay composed? That shift changes everything. It tells the other person, you can yell, but you won't pull me into chaos with you. It creates space for reason where there would have only been noise. And here's something powerful. Staying calm isn't just about protecting your argument. It's about protecting your dignity. Because how many times have you looked back on an argument and thought, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I acted like that. That regret comes when emotion hijacks you. But when you stay calm, you walk away proud. You walk away knowing you kept control of yourself, no matter what the other person did. That's strength no one can take from you. People often think calm means passive, that if you don't match the energy, you're somehow letting them win. But it's the opposite. Calm is active. Calm is deliberate. Calm is strength under fire. It doesn't mean you don't speak. It means when you do speak, your words carry weight because they're not drowning in noise. They're sharp. They're clear. They're unforgettable. And this is where the real influence lies. Think back on your life. The people who impacted you the most, were they the ones who yelled the loudest? Or were they the ones who stayed steady when everyone else lost control? The ones whose presence calmed the storm instead of adding to it. That's the kind of influence you have the power to carry into every argument, every conflict, every moment of tension. So here's the reminder: anyone can yell. Anyone can lose their cool. But not everyone can stay composed when emotions run high. That's rare. That's powerful. And that's what makes people listen. Because in the end, control of the room doesn't go to the one who shouts the loudest. It goes to the one who never had to. Every trial has an ending. Every lawyer knows that when all the evidence is laid out, when all the arguments are finished, they can't just stop talking and hope the jury figured it out on their own. No, they make a closing argument. They tell the jury exactly what they want. We ask for a guilty verdict, or we ask for you to let this person go free. Because without a clear ask, the jury is left in confusion, and confusion doesn't move people. Clarity does. Now, think about how most of our arguments in life actually end. We pour out everything we're feeling. We go back and forth. Maybe we cry. Maybe we shout. Maybe we even cool off after a while. But when it's all over, how often do we leave the conversation with no clear resolution? We walk away tired. We walk away raw. But we don't actually know what we're supposed to do next. And when there's no resolution, the argument just gets buried alive, waiting to come back again in the future. Arguing like a lawyer means you don't just fight for the sake of fighting. You fight with purpose. And the purpose isn't just to be heard. The purpose is to move forward. That's why you don't just end with emotion, you end with direction. You give a clear ask. You say, here's what I need, or here's what I hope we can try, or here's the change I'd like us to work on together. That clarity